唔係我坐喺度都得，但係我要睇住部機喎。
哦，如果要睇住部機嘅話，
而家要幾多時？
咁樣，因為佢呢度有啲聽得高啲。
唔緊要啊，
我幫你撳咯，不如好唔好啊？
嚇？
因為不如我幫你撳嗰個 slide，即係因為我呢度，即係部嘢喺呢度。
啊 ，OK，
咁就我呢度攞部 OK。
你屋有冇啊？有冇佢？我會租啊。
如果你點頭示意我就。
因為都睇唔清楚啊，太光啊，所以呢個咧就係呢個。呢個得，我用呢個。
但係唔會阻住個河。其實唔一定嘅。係啊，咁我冇啊。
跟住就望住翻轉，睇下會唔會有啲咩 technical difficulty，即係譬如呢個唔可熄機咁。我想問開始。
我
要問佢咯。
3604點開始。
準時。
在後面做。這個是3點嘅 WiFi 做咯。哦，在咁我不如開住。我差點要死嘅。
Hello. Okay.
由香港大學學生會法律學會舉辦嘅公民講堂即將開始，請各位嘅聽眾將你哋嘅手提電話以及其他響鬧裝置設置為靜音，以免妨礙講堂嘅進行。多謝晒。咁各位好啦，歡迎嚟到香港大學學生會法律學會舉辦嘅公民講堂，由私隱權 versus 生命權，喺公共衛生面前係咪要全然奉上私隱呢？咁肺炎疫情肆虐，為我哋嘅生活帶嚟種種嘅不便，而我哋亦都失去咗 唔好意思啊，有少少 technical difficulties，唔好意思。喂，唔好意思啊，我哋重新嚟過啊，唔好意思。咁大家好，歡迎嚟到香港大學學生會法律學會舉辦嘅公民講堂，私隱權 versus 生命權，在公共衛生面前全然奉上私隱。疫情當前，政府嘅抗疫措施對保障個人私隱構成咗一定程度嘅影響，為保障市民嘅健康同埋生命安全，政府推行咗多項嘅政策，當中亦都涉及咗好多收集到嘅私人資料，用於追蹤感染人士同埋其密切接觸者，例如係透過安心出行嘅應用程式向用家收集行蹤記錄，又或者係進行病毒檢測嘅時候所得嘅基因資料，難免會令人憂慮私隱係咪得到應有嘅保障？到底我哋係咪應該為咗公共嘅利益而全然奉上個人私隱呢？生命權同埋私隱權兩者都同樣不容忽視，我哋又應該點樣作出平衡同埋取捨呢？本會今日就非常榮幸邀請到前首席政府律師以及個人資料私隱專員黃繼兒大律師同大家分享呢個課題。咁我哋喺呢一場公民講堂喺講者分享完畢嘅時候，就會有問答環節嘅。現場觀眾如果有任何嘅疑問，可以留到呢一個環節再舉手發問。至於睇緊現場直播嘅各位觀眾，亦都可以喺留言區嗰度寫低你嘅問題。我哋會喺問答環節度抽出其中一啲問題去發問嘅。咁事不宜遲啦，我哋就有請黃大狀。
咁首先多謝各位咧，就今日抽空嚟呢度，因為我冇諗過原來係用中文㗎，所以第一樣嘢就要 application for leave 啊，可唔可以用英文啊？可以嚇 ，OK， so it's all right. Is it okay that I speak in English?
Yes.
All right, okay. Right, it's always a nice and pleasant feeling to be back to Hong Kong here. I can honestly tell you that this is entirely a strange place to me because I never imagined that I could take the MTR or drive to Hong Kong U campus. Okay, I was here 38 years ago. Okay, at that time I had to catch a bus, no MTR, a bus number 7 or number 3. Okay, no seat. Okay. Crammed like sardines, and it took about 35 minutes to 40 minutes to come up from Central. So that's my university days. So now, of course, air conditioned, escalators, lift lobbies, and this is a very nice surrounding and environment for you to study, and I really envy you. The other thing I envy you about is the organizations of a law society, law association to be exact. Okay, they organize talks like this, public lectures, and you're very professional, all dressed professionally. Okay, so that reminds me of what my former Attorney General told me when I joined, not told me alone, but all lawyers in the AGC in those days, now known as the DOJ, Department of Justice. At that time, we only had about 45 lawyers. Now it's about 500 lawyers in the DOJ. And the Attorney General, now known as the Secretary for Justice, reminded all lawyers in his chambers, in his department, to dress like lawyers. Okay, because in those days, some lawyers, went to work in jeans, so he was not happy about it. So he issued a circular saying that lawyers should dress like lawyers. I can detect that some of you really dress like lawyers, and this is a commendable effort, to get to the professionalism that you are expected of when you graduate and become practitioners. So I would very much like to take off my mask because it's so annoying, to say the least. If I have to speak through a microphone, and then I keep breathing, and then I can see the steam and the mist on my glasses, and I could hardly see you. But bear in mind that this is a public place. This is a public place, and I will be violating or contravening the law if I don't wear a mask in a public place, so I better put it on and keep it. COVID-19 is a pandemic. Let's get the definition right. Pandemic means it's more than epidemic. It's worse than an epidemic. A pandemic around the globe, around the world. A disease, a virus, and some sort of a health hazard that affects the entire world. So this is the nature of COVID-19. Okay? The other thing is that I would like to flag up at the outset of this lecture is that privacy right is a fundamental human right. I just finished another talk with the engineers and the business organizations in Central. Gosh, they never thought of privacy right as a fundamental human right. They quoted the example saying that, look, I don't need to understand, how algorithm works in relation to artificial intelligence systems, for example. As in the case of boarding a Boeing 777, I don't need to know how the aircraft works. I don't need to know how my Tesla works, as long as I can drive. So it doesn't really matter. So this is a very common view of those who are not human rights lawyers. They always take it that I only need to know the technical part of the systems. I don't need to know the human part of in particular, the data which belongs to individuals. So the difference is, you get on board an aircraft, you don't need to know how the engine works or doesn't work. But if you have a facial recognition device in front of you, you need to know how it works and where your data, because it collects your data goes to. So there is a hell of a lot of difference between boarding an aircraft that you don't know how it works and accepting surveillance or facial recognition devices, cameras for example, which collect your data and forming a part of the big data through the algorithms and analytics, generating new set of data, and then they will come to a certain conclusion, they call it automated decisions, about you yourself, about the community. So that's a different issue altogether. So today we focus on privacy and COVID-19. As Andrew, right? Andrew set the scene properly. Do we have to give up our privacy, our personal data protection, for the interest of fighting COVID-19? Okay, that's the issue that we are going to focus on. So let's go back to the fundamentals. Okay, next slide, please. DNAs. Nowadays it's very popular to say DNA, pedigree, genomics, 基因排序. Okay, now if you look at the 基因排序, genomics of privacy right, what I can tell you is that you have 4 legal instruments to refer to. The first one being this is the paramount, this is the overriding, what we call constitutional document of Hong Kong, basic law. What you need to know is, apart from Article 5, 8, and 30, I read out the concluding or the holistic provision of Article 39, and that is of the Basic Law. The provisions of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and International Labour Conventions, as applied to Hong Kong, shall remain in force and shall be implemented through the laws of Hong Kong SAR. The rights and freedoms enjoyed by Hong Kong residents shall not be restricted unless as prescribed by law. Such restrictions shall not contravene the provisions of the preceding paragraph of the article. Preceding paragraph of the article refers to Hong Kong residents enjoying the other rights or freedoms safeguarded by the laws of Hong Kong, SAR laws. So this is a this is a conclusive part of the Basic Law, which means the rights and freedoms that residents of Hong Kong, not necessarily permanent residents, okay, not necessarily nationals of the PRC, but simply residents of Hong Kong, as at the date of 30th of June 1997. If they enjoy that piece of right, human rights included, they will continue to enjoy the same after or starting from the 1st of July 1997. And they refer to three basic international instruments known as covenants. The first one is about civil and political rights, 公民及政治權利公約 ICCPR. In ICCPR, okay, you can see at the bottom there of my chart, you have Article 17. Article 17 of the ICCPR reads, no one shall be subjected to arbitrary or unlawful interference with his privacy, family, home, blah, 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 nor to unlawful attacks on his honor and reputation. So, no one shall be subjected to interference with his privacy. The first time mentioned in the ICCPR, the national instrument. Mind you, the right of privacy is preceded by two adjectives. One, arbitrary. Two, unlawful. Unlawful interference. So, what do you mean by arbitrary? What do you mean by unlawful? Unlawful, that's why, you keep listening to speeches made by government officials about 依法. Okay, 依法 literally means lawful, as prescribed by the law. Arbitrary, the other way around, no law. So that's why they put in the new law. Okay, and this is the literal interpretation of the legislation. Okay, as you know, you have the rules of interpretation of legislation. This is the lecture 1 that I had, okay, 40 years ago. I think you still have these rules of interpretations in your is it legal system or lecture, right? So this is the rule number 1. Arbitrary means no laws, no regulations, no policies, no systems, no reasoning. In those days, it's like, at the pleasure of, the government or those ruling the community, ruling Hong Kong. So this is arbitrary. This is the second piece of legislation that you have to go to if you really would like to understand the genomics, pedigree, and DNA of privacy. And of course, in Article 17 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, is mirror imaged in our Bill of Rights Ordinance, Article 14. By the way, on the right-hand side of this slide, you see the letter JD. It means joint declaration between the United Kingdom and the PRC. Joint declaration is was intended to be the blueprint of how Hong Kong should be ruled, governed, after in those days it was known as the handover. Nowadays we say reunification. Okay? The JD was the blueprint. In other words, an international instrument signed by a representative of two countries, a copy of which was deposited in the UN official, I think there is a place to store and keep all these international instruments. So joint declaration serves as the blueprint, the consensus of two countries before a significant international event took place. So that was also mentioned in the joint declaration. So privacy as a fundamental human right has been protected under various instruments. One, the international instrument, joint declaration and the ICCPR. Two, at the local level, that is the Bill of Rights Ordinance. Three, at the national level, the basic law of HKSAR. Now, the basic law is not a piece of local legislation. It is a piece of legislation that applies across the entire country of PRC. All right? Bear that in mind. Basic law is not a local legislation. Basic law is a national law that everybody in PRC will have to abide by or to observe. Okay? But because of, I read out, the provisions, the details, the letters of Article 17 and Article 39 of the Basic Law to you, you will find that privacy right is not an absolute right, but a qualified right. In other words, there are certain conditions that you could, or certain restrictions when applied, and the right of this fundamental human right of privacy will have to give way. Okay, I'll go back to that. I'll come back to this point later on. Bear in mind, privacy right is not an absolute right. Privacy right is a qualified right. Next. What is an absolute right? Absolute right in the international or our local legislation, the Bill of Rights Ordinance, there are not many of them. One of them is right to life, which is an absolute right. And if you look at the article, ICCPR, Article 6, which is mirror imaged in Article 2 of our Bill of Rights Ordinance, and coupled with the general comments made by the United Nations. General comments is like some sort of interpretation of certain articles in the instrument. It refers to Article 6 of the ICCPR. One, every human being has the inherent rights to life. This right shall be protected by law. No one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his right. Okay? And then this is the right to life provision in ICCPR. And the general comments made by the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations made it quite clear that in times of an epidemic, at that time, the example quoted there was, the sexually transmitted disease. Forgot the name of the disease. 叫做咩病啊？我記咗。即係同性戀成日都怕呢個病叫咩病？愛滋，愛滋病 ，OK。咁呢個愛滋病咧就 name 咗喺嗰度咧，就係一個係病咧，而係 which is regarded as any restrictions would be surrendered, to protecting the right to life. So now I think they should have included, COVID-19, in the general comments. So this is an absolute right. In other words, if you have a right to life issue, privacy right should give way. You can put in the context of what you have learned, in your law lectures, where there is a conflict between privacy right and the right to life. The right to life shall prevail. Okay? So what it means is a supreme right. Okay? And the right to life relates to the right to the data subject, that is the individual concerned, and others in society, as a result of which the governments will have to take appropriate measures. So this is the provision as explained by the UN Human Rights Committee in the general comments, that the government will have to take appropriate measures. Next. Okay, what should we do in Hong Kong if we have a look at the local legislation, apart from the Bill of Rights Ordinance? Bill of Rights Ordinance just simply set out the principles of protecting privacy right, as in the case of the ICCPR. We have a specific legislation protecting personal data. Section 4 says, a data user shall not contravene this law, the Personal Data Privacy Ordinance, Cap 486. Data user means organizations, a company, including the government, the public authorities. Okay? You and I are defined as, in the law, in the ordinance, as data subjects, not data users, although it sounds a bit confusing. And also, not to contravene the law, but what it refers to is the schedule set out at the end of the ordinance, Schedule 1, known as Data Protection Principles, DPP. Next. Okay, now before we go to the data protection principles, the DPPs, let's have a look at the risks, data-related risks to organization. Organizations, as I said, include companies, organizations, small, medium, and micro enterprises, charitable organizations, the government, and so on. From the point of view of the organizations, if data protection principles are contravened, that would result in, one, the defection of the consumers, the individuals, the data subjects. They will turn away from, for example, from Facebook. If Facebook contravenes one of the data protection principles, they will go away. They will go from WhatsApp to Signal. Typical defection. To financial loss, of course, you will lose money out of, for example, our advertising. And you will enhance the regulatory enforcement. You will spark off. You will initiate, the attention and the investigation of the authority. And you have operation disruptions because of the contravention, like Cathay Pacific a couple of years ago, okay, when they had data breaches. So the operation will be disrupted because of this breach of data protection principle in relation to the security of data. Next. Customer defection refers to data breach, scandals, and then the trust will be impaired, and then of course the customer will turn away. Okay? In a survey conducted by Microsoft, it shows 53% of the consumer in Asia Pacific would switch to another organization, reduce the usage of digital service, and stop using the service altogether. In terms of financial loss, because of the breach, because of the scandals, the trust impaired, and then the Facebook shares price would drop by 6% in 2018, and then further drop by 19% after they have been fined as a result of the incident relating to Cambridge Analytica. Okay, of course, in Hong Kong, if you study economics, okay, the stock market here in Hong Kong and probably in the mainland China, okay, does not necessarily reflect this phenomenon, because we have some sort of factors, including expectation factor. The third consequence of a breach from the point of view of the organization is fines, hefty monetary fines. Okay, Facebook, Google, the maximum fines will be imposed. Recently, you heard about Alibaba in mainland China. Fined 180億人民幣, okay, which is about 4% of the annual turnover. And this is a standard set by the EU recently. When there is a breach of the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations, effective 2018, and a maximum fine up to 4% of the annual turnover, not profit, of the organization may be imposed. So they follow this criterion, this standard, and impose the maximum fine up to 180億人民幣. People keep telling me that this is not a case of privacy. This is a case of antitrust, 反壟斷. In fact, very few people would understand that the correlation between data collection, data usage, and antitrust, monopoly, 壟斷, they are like twin brothers. Why? Because Alibaba collected the personal data, a huge amount of personal data, within or outside the mainland China. Because of this big data they collected, they would be in a position which is an unfair position, okay, to manipulate, to use, to transfer, to disclose, to sell, okay, the personal data of the data subjects. So it's closely related. In fact, it has been the same consideration in the United States, in EU, that whenever they have data collection, they have consideration about monopoly because of the unequal treatment or unequal share, unequal use, unequal level, not playing field, not level playing fields, that they will enjoy an advantage over the others in the use of the personal data. So, personal data privacy has now become a very topical issue in relation to the multinational corporations, in relation to diplomatic relations. Did you remember the closure of the Consulate General's office in Texas of the United States. One of the reasons why they closed down the embassy, the consulate CG's office, was that there was an issue of privacy, the data, okay, the use of data and the collection of data. Right. But engineers, politicians seem to brush privacy right aside, because whenever privacy right is mentioned, that will create certain concern upon which the authorities will have to address. And this is a very difficult issue, especially after the passing of certain laws which protect public order, public security, or even national security. Okay, but mind you, security, public security, national security is an exemption. It's one of the exemptions that the protection of privacy does not apply. Okay, so this is an exemption, part of it. Okay, next. Operation disruption, of course, I mentioned about it, so I don't need to repeat that. But in relation to the risks that individuals will suffer, will encounter, generally includes massive and ubiquitous collection of data, tracking online and offline. Andrew mentioned about location tracking. Now, this is one of them. Individuals unaware of data collection and use. When you come out of the high-speed train from the mainland, I think you have remote recollection of this. You wouldn't have the experience of traveling by a high-speed train for more than a year now. I used it once, but as soon as I came out of the carriage of the high-speed train, before I reached the immigration of the mainland, Hong Kong, I could see more than 6 cameras were facing me. Okay, I'm very alert of all these surveillance cameras, right? And then when I go to the Hong Kong immigration, the same. You have all these cameras. Why? Recognition. They keep your data. Now this is an exemption because you're talking about immigration. So immigration, of course, they will keep your data. The only concern about this surveillance is how you're going to use my data, right? Because of what? Why are you concerned about how the use of data? Why? Any suggestion?
Maybe to track criminals that will pass the immigration.
Well, that is dicey, okay? If you're a criminal, right? We're not about, no, this is not the legal reason. I must, at the outset, let you know the legal reason, the legal basis for your concern. Because that personal data, the image, is yours and it belongs to you, not the government. It's my personal asset. It's my personal property. If you use others' images, I don't care. But you keep my image, you keep my personal data, I should care. That is why authorities all around the world that take privacy as a fundamental human right shows concern about this, the act of the public authority, because you are collecting and using my own asset. I should be in control of my own asset, like the money in your wallet, in your purse. Nobody can take it away. Despite, or let alone not to mention the fact that the data that you keep may be attacked or may breach or be disclosed accidentally, as it happened in Hong Kong years ago about the voters' personal data lost. And those who have access to this personal data of yours might be in a position to do something that you cannot expect, like criminal activities. And then comes the criminal part. like 詐騙。Okay, 90-year-old elderly was swindled, 2個億係嘛？最近有個阿婆 2.5 2.5億。How? Personal data. The telephone number, the bank account details, these are the data of yours and yours alone. Nobody can take it away. And that's the legal basis. Okay? Of course, if you're in authority, if you are investigative authority, you don't care because the overall objective is to fight crime, to investigate crime. Okay? But that's not the legal reason, not the legal basis for your concern. Your concern is that this is my data, my property. Let me take charge of it, not you. That's why they always ask for your consent. And then we go back to that issue again. What a genuine, meaningful consent is all about. Okay, so meaningful notice and consent. Next. The second issue concern about from the individual's point of view is that very often, including the government, the public authority will keep saying that only unidentified data will be collected or will be kept. No personal data about an unidentified person will be kept, like your Ansim出行. Okay, we only keep your data in the device without your name. Okay, we don't keep it. Your device keeps it. Okay, so this is one way to get around this protection point. But the scientists keep telling us, despite the fact that it's anonymized, your identity, or pseudonymized. Anonymized, 冚咗佢 pseudonymized 俾個假名佢 ，OK 假嘅 ，it can be re-identified. I believe it. Okay, of course it can be re-identified. Right? You can't simply say, look, no, I don't keep your name. I only keep your mobile phone number, no name. I don't keep your name. I only keep your IP address of your notebook. Of course, these numbers can be analyzed algorithmically. Okay, so it can be re-identified. Your identity can be re-identified. So that's the problem. The third concern is profiling. Unexpected data use. Profiling, you have come across the use of cookies. Profiling is very common, very popular. In fact, it is the most popular way of making money. That is profiling. I have a bad habit of watching football matches. I play golf from time to time. I receive advertisements on these after I turn to these websites for football matches and golf courses. And you might have heard of the fact that as soon as you get out of the marriage registry in the mainland China, you receive advertisements about your wedding, your banquet, everything, furniture, right? Profiling. This is known as profiling. Okay, so that might predict your intimate and sensitive data. Because of your profiling, they will give you, one example is that a father of a teenage girl received advertisement of baby nappies, okay, before his daughter realized that she was pregnant. So the father received advertisement, interesting, because her daughter went to a pregnancy test, okay, immediately. And this is profiling. So this is not right, because I should be in control of my own data. Why should you invade my privacy, intrude my privacy? The fourth one is bias and discrimination. Okay, there is a case about feeding in, inputting all these precedents, judgments, case judgments, into the court's computer. So they key in all the relevant material facts and the law, and hopefully, the judgment, the conclusion that come out of the analytics, okay, will be right. And then they have a test. They have a pilot test. They have run all the surveys, and the conclusion is that about 5 to 10% of the conclusions were wrong, because the machine, the algorithm, the machine that works, okay, has a chance of making or coming to a wrong conclusion, which is biased or discriminatory. Okay, so that might not be a trivial, as you said, the trivial issue, because in terms of criminal offenses, one might be too many in terms of custodial sentence, in terms of loss of liberty, and so on. So this is something that the individual as well as the public authority should be concerned about. You might result in unfair discrimination. Okay, because of the unpredictability and low transparency, you can see that that is a black box theory here. Because the scientists don't know how the machine works, how the machine learns. Okay, and the person who is in charge of the machine doesn't really understand, how it works. People outside the technical department of that device or system couldn't care less, because they are not responsible for it, and they don't have the expertise to do it. So in terms of question marks, unpredictability, and that is the result of a black box system. So this causes concern. Another one is data monopoly. Okay, and this is a concern that escapes the attention of many people, including organizations. They always believe that I only use your data. And the data is not your data. The data is generated by the machine. So I have the source data from you. After the machine learning, what it comes out is a set of generated data. So it's not yours. Okay, I can make the best use, including in a monopolistic way, of your own data, and then I can, of course, as a result of which, I can make huge profit out of it. Airbnb, have you heard of it? Uber, have you heard of it? Airbnb is one of the largest accommodation booking agents in the world. Okay, but they don't even have a single pillow or bed. So how could they make a living? Your data. Uber, they don't even have a single vehicle. They don't even hire as an employee a driver. Okay, but how could they make money? Your data. Okay, and then recently Alibaba, Jingdong, Taobao, then the strange or discriminatory result is that 殺熟就大陸叫做咩叫殺熟咧 They know that you are a frequent customer, an established customer, 長期客戶, and then they will quote you the price, which is higher than the price that they will quote for a newcomer. 咁佢哋叫大陸咧叫呢做殺熟，唔熟唔食啫。So this is unfair. Right? So they make the best use of the data. They know that you come to frequent their website from time to time and make purchases. So they profile you. So next time they quote you a higher price because you won't be. You are established client. Right? Same as in the supermarket. Because of the pandemic, I've been going to the supermarket, shopping at the supermarket more often than I used to. I discovered a year ago, I bought the same brand, same weight, same package of coffee, beans. That cost me $90. Last week, I bought the same package again. It cost me $133. Okay? Inflation over 12 months, 30%. Has your pay increased by 30%? No. Right? This is unhealthy, I believe, in my view, in Hong Kong. Because of the, not monopoly, because of, right, the excuse that you use supermarket more often than you used to be, and also because of the need. So the need and also the expectation factor trigger in the demand function, and they will boost up the price. All right? So data monopoly is another. Okay, next is the issue, crucial legal basis. Personal data belongs to you, to individuals. How can personal data be better protected? In our law, there are 6 principles. We call them DPP. In other countries or other regions, there are more than 6, and we chose 6 only for our legislation. So we have a very comprehensive set of legislation protecting their personal data, but it's not the most comprehensive one, because we only have 6 principles. It signifies the entire life cycle of your personal data, from the moment that it is collected, the purpose and the means. The purpose must be specified. And I'll show you later on, the purpose specified in the vaccination form, okay? And the means must be fair. So you must use fair means. In other words, you must be very transparent. You cannot be fraudulent about your purpose of collection. The second principle is about accuracy and retention. You must update the personal data of those individuals that you collected in the first place. You must keep updating it, and you must not keep the data longer than is necessary. So you cannot keep the personal data for 10 or 15 years. For example, in the case of many data breaches, because they forgot all about this retention of personal data of the passengers. Once it was attacked, when there was a data breach, security breach, they lost all the data. You should keep reviewing the need for keeping those the personal data. If not necessarily required, you must delete them. The use. This is the use of the data. Use includes transfer. Use includes disclosure. Okay, if you use, transfer, or disclose personal data, you must have the consent of the personal, the individuals, unless the purpose is the same as you have already prescribed when you first collected the data from these individuals. So if the purpose of using the personal data of individuals is different from the purpose for which the data is collected, you will have to obtain the consent of the persons, the individuals. Okay, transfer, and you have to tell the individuals whether you will transfer the data to anybody else. If so, who, or the categories of who they are. Okay, you must be very transparent about it. Security. This is about how you can keep the data collected in a safe place, in a safe way, free from accidental loss, free from interference, free from being hacked, okay, free from being phishing. Nowadays, they don't hack your computer, they send you phishing messages. They send you messages, that that you will be tempted to release your own personal data. So security is a very vital principle for personal protection. Openness, transparency. You must inform the individuals from whom the personal data is collected. So you must let them, keep them informed. You must be very honest about the privacy policy. So if you switch on your iPhone, the first page is privacy. Okay? If you go to the COVID-19 vaccination point, the first thing they show you is your privacy statement. That is why. Openness. You must be open about it. Okay? Access and correction. Okay? We don't have a right to be forgotten in Hong Kong. But in Europe, certain information, personal data, that is not to your advantage. For example, a criminal record of yours 15, 20 years ago, okay, should be deleted. Okay? And that is the right. In Hong Kong, there is no such right. But there is a requirement under this principle, and that is, when you have access to certain individual's personal data, you must ensure that it is correct, and you must keep it correct. So this is an indirect way of delete or keeping the correct information about individuals. Next. So these are the risks that people are concerned about, because once we were born, our personal data was also born. Okay? Just imagine, even if the baby is not given a name, he or she will be given 手帶，嗰條手帶叫咩名？ Some sort of identification kit, number, barcode, right? And that is personal data. Because according to Section 2 of the ordinance, you can ascertain the identity of a person, and that is personal data. It doesn't have to be a name. As long as you can ascertain the identity of a person. So that's why a photograph, a telephone number, even an IP address is now regarded as personal data in other countries. Not quite in Hong Kong. Hong Kong, we have to ascertain your identity. In Europe, for example, they don't use the word ascertain. They use the word identifiable. In other words, able to identify, which is quite different from ascertaining. Ascertaining 肯定性好高。Identifiable 可以就得㗎啦。All right? So that's the direction that when I was a privacy commissioner, I have been asking the government, in order to protect the personal data of individuals, you must expand the scope of the definition. Okay, in 22 years ago, when the law was passed, they don't have IP address, things like this. Now you have. In other words, you will be able to identify a person without having to check the ID card number. For the first 10 years, privacy issues focused around ID card. 10 years later, mobile phone number. Now, you can see that the most important number that you need to protect is not your ID card number. It's a mobile phone number. Okay. 3 years ago, I attended a World Conference, the UN Rapporteur for Privacy, said, in the conference, with an audience of more than 800, and he said, and I quote, "Your smartphone is the only device that could tell that you have extramarital affairs." All right? That is how your smartphone is the most important part of your personal data device. as long as they have your ID mobile phone number, all personal data, including your friends' data, will be collected. Okay? Have you not read or heard or seen advertisement of money lending over the television? They say they don't need your ID card number. They only need a phone call from you, and they will 搞掂晒，打個電話就得啦。Okay? You go and have a QR code. They do the QR code, 好方便, very convenient, very satisfying, 好 trendy. And once you do the ID code operator also do the contents of a phone. Okay? So I seldom use scanner. Okay? That's why people don't use onsamchalang, because of their QR code. Right? So, but as I will explain later. Okay? For the other commercial organizations, they always show you the ID code, the QR code. They always tempt you by 留低個電話掃一掃 and they give you 50蚊利是紅包 or give you 5% or give you 幾多分 okay? Because they can sell your data. You have open market and closed market broker selling personal data. Why do they need the data? The data they collect today can be used to predict in 15 years' time what the fashion will be like. And that is very important for the industry. All right? You say, how do they know it's true? No, they don't need to know that it's true. They only need to know that there is a way, it's possible, because they need to plan ahead. Okay? Exemptions. I talked about not absolute right, qualified right. That means you have restrictions from which you could avoid the liability of not abiding by the law, the data protection principles, for example. If you fail to abide by the provisions of the data protection principles, the DPPs, you could invoke the exemptions set out in the ordinance. And you have to invoke, you have to put in cogent evidence to suggest that I could rely on this exemption. And time and again, when I was in the office, I advised the government that you should be well prepared, that you need to invoke the exemption. You have to carry out a due diligence test, for example. You have to make sure that you have sufficient and adequate evidence to suggest that this exemption could be invoked. For example, exemption health is an exemption. Section 59 of Cap 486, the privacy ordinance. That will exempt the contravention of DPP3, that is the use of personal data, data protection. Use includes transfer, disclosure. Okay? DPP6, that is the access to the information. For example, immigration keep your personal data. You could write to the immigration department to ask for a copy of your personal data. Okay? In every government department where your personal data is collected and kept, you can always ask for access to read it or to have a copy of your own personal data. That is section 18(1)(b). Okay? So in relation to these three rights, one, the proper use of your own personal data, that is DPP3. Two, DPP3, that refers to the access to your own personal data. And section 18(1)(b), a copy of your own personal data. If you can prove, if the authority, the organization, can prove that it is likely, so the threshold is not that high, it's likely to cause serious harm to the physical and mental health of the data subject, that is, you yourself, data subject, or, and that's very important, any other individual that is your friends, the citizens in Hong Kong. The principle, the compliance with the principles that I mentioned, the three principles, the three provisions, could be exempted without consent of the data subject. In other words, if it is in the interest of yourself or of Andrew's interest that I review your personal data to medical and health department because you just had a conversation, I fear that there might be a transmission of the COVID-19. I don't need to ask for your personal consent. Strictly speaking, the purpose of collecting your personal data, for example, the university office, is for registration purposes. It's not for health purposes. It's not for this purpose. They will need to ask for your specific consent before they transfer the personal data to the medical and health department. But in this case, because it's exempted, they don't need to ask for your personal consent. So your personal data relating to your health and also personal data relating to the identity or location. Now this is very important. Location of the data subject can also be transferred. For example, you were here. 呢個叫做綜合大樓 ，OK, UG1. Okay. Next. Another exemption is emergency. Of course, this is again collection and use. If it is otherwise prejudicing prejudicing the interest of the public, of course, you have the emergency situation, identifying an individual in life-threatening situation, informing his family member, relevant persons, and emergency rescue and relief. Okay, so if you go to Hang San, okay, hiking, for example, okay, and then you come across an emergency situation where a person was found unconscious in a country park. Because she is unconscious, you cannot ask for her permission or his permission to make a phone call out of his own mobile phone, to call his or her parents, relatives, or friends to come to rescue. So you don't, strictly speaking, without having the consent of the data subject, you cannot make such phone call. But because it is an emergency situation, so you can make a phone call without contravening the rules, the data protection rules, the principles. Okay, so this is quite obvious and sensible too. So it's always a balance between privacy and public health, individuals' right and public interest. It's a balancing exercise. So now for the COVID-19 case, we have a global disease which threatens the lives of everybody. And the interesting thing is that all around the world, there are unorthodox technological measures applied. Okay, that's why the WHO, and that's why international organizations will have to come out and set a standard. EU, EC, United Kingdom, USA, China, mainland Hong Kong, Singapore, they all have different measures, technological measures. And then we need to strike the right balance. So I try to recap what the other jurisdictions would say and how Hong Kong has been doing it. First is about mandatory quarantine. In Hong Kong, we have a location device. And we say you must comply with the DPP, the data protection principle first. And that is the purpose must be lawful. You have the lawful purpose because of Cap 599 嗰個醫療管制嗰個條例 okay, and a minimum data. You cannot collect data more than required. We call it minimum data collection principle. 一定要攞最少嘅 data. I was once asked to fill in the form in Pacific Place. The only reason is that after I made the purchase in a shop, I was told that I could collect a souvenir from the reception counter. Okay, being 貪心 okay, 自美 okay, 冇志氣 I went to line up to collect the souvenir. Okay, and I was asked to queue up. Goodness me, the souvenir must be very attractive, right? Otherwise, why are there so many people queuing up just to collect the souvenir? No, we were asked to fill in a form on a tablet, an iPad, something like that. Okay, so when it came into my turn, I had a look. Goodness me, 6 pages. Okay, after filling in all the basic information about your name, your address, and the mobile phone, comes to your income. Okay, education standard. Okay, work experience. Okay, 3rd page, your partner, your spouse information. 5th page, your parents. 4th page, the children. Okay, goodness me. I said, look, you're not collecting the minimum data required for the collection of a souvenir. Rubbish, totally rubbish. Okay, this is absolutely. I raised the concern at that time. I was the privacy commissioner. I said, look, how can you collect information? And then when I collected the souvenir, you know what it was? A shoe brush, 鞋刷, with a bottle of shoe shine, 鞋油, which reads, you can only read it in French to show that it's 名貴 French 嘛 ，OK， 而家梗係唔得啦，而家 OK， 因為你嘅標籤唔掂咪拉咁嘛，而家 OK， 所以哇，用無盡得咩奇蹟嚟攞 collect personal data OK。 Control of disease regulation is the legislation, giving the authorized person all the power. Next page. What they need to obtain is the consent of the quarantined person. They have the access to the data, they need the consent to the quarantine premises, the mobile apps, imaging equipment, they have to give consent. And they should be given a choice. Activation of an app and other means. Activation of the device, of the tracking device, for example. So they must have a choice. Did you remember in the case of Alibaba and Ant Financial? In relation to Taobao and Kingdom, one of the reasons that they gave for the huge amount of fine is that 二選一. In other words, they can only choose between Alibaba, Jingdong, and one other provider, service provider. And according to the 反壟斷法 in China, in mainland China, it's not right. Okay, so they don't have a choice. A choice is crucial, okay, to the right of the person. This one is about your location, about your personal data. Location can identify who you are, okay, because of the device. Okay, so you must give them a choice. Contact tracing in Hong Kong is centralized. Personal data collected, stored in a central database upon registration. Okay, decentralized. Anonymized data on individual mobile devices. Pseudonym, no real name will be used. Pseudonym IDs will be uploaded to central services. So there are 2 approaches. One is centralized, 2 is decentralized. Only anonymous data will be uploaded. So this is a contact tracing approach. Either it's centralized or decentralized. But of course, this is the way to access or store data collected from the person wearing a contact tracing device. So they must be well informed. The individuals must be aware of the device, how the data collected is kept. Leave home safe, 安心出行. My advice given to them was that the government must conduct a privacy impact assessment first, because they will review or keep the data of a person during the entire day, the whole day, where he has been, if he accedes to the request of scanning the QR code every time he enters or leaves a premises. So impact assessment. Privacy by design. So the design of that 安心出行 leave home safe must be least privacy intrusive, must comply with the data protection principles. No location tracking, GPS data, registration or collection of personal data when downloading. Okay, they cannot allow the GPS data, they cannot allow the location tracking, okay, when they register the personal data, when they download the apps, for example. Okay, so this is the advice accepted by the government. And now the government will say, only you yourself will keep the data, because it's only downloaded to your own phone. Okay, but the interesting thing is, how could they know, or how could they tell you through messaging that one of the premises that you visited was infected? Okay, so this is something that we can't go through all the entire process because the engineers won't tell you. But this is in the interest of the community. So again, the public interest will prevail when there is such a situation. They can invoke the exemption if there is any breach. But now they say there is no such breach. There is no such concern about privacy. So the government officials from time to time they say it's not a matter of privacy, it's a matter of public health. Okay? No transfer of data. They say the personal data will be kept in your phone, they won't transfer it to other departments. Visit records deleted after 31 days. They say they will delete it after 31 days. Why 31? I think because normally they will, the symptoms of COVID-19 will not die down or disappear within the first 24 days or 21 days. So they give it a longer period, a little bit longer period than required. So now this is the next statement of purpose of collection of personal data. Now this is a photograph. I didn't type it out. I made a copy of it after my vaccination. Yeah, 睇唔到？包大嘅。咦？包唔大嘅？啊，得，笠大睇唔到啊！我讀俾你聽。This is in a form of an A5 paper. 嗱張嘢 ，OK? Statement of purpose of collection of personal data. OK? 佢就冇寫係邊個俾你嘅，係咪？佢係咩紙仔嘅啫？They should be more 大方。Okay? The provision of personal data is voluntary. OK? 冇人逼你㗎。If you do not provide sufficient information, you may not be able to receive vaccination. Okay? The first paragraph. 自願㗎，唔打就可能冇針打㗎嚇，唔死就。Purpose of collecting your personal data. The personal data provided will be used by the government for one or more of the following purposes. 嗱，講晒俾你聽啊。Purposes. 1. Checking with relevant government departments and organizations on the status of receiving COVID-19 vaccine. B, informing relevant government bureaus or departments and organizations for arranging vaccination and follow-up after the vaccination. C, for creation, processing and maintenance of an e-health subsidies account and the administration and monitoring of the COVID-19 vaccination program, including but not limited to a verification procedure by electronic means with the data kept by the Immigration Department. D, transferring to the Department of Health and relevant organizations collaborated with the government, including the University of Hong Kong, for continuous monitoring of the safety and clinical event associated with COVID-19 vaccination under the COVID-19 vaccination program. E, for statistical and research purposes. And F, any other legitimate purposes as may be required, authorized, or permitted by law. Now, they give you one, the specific purposes, okay, for vaccination program, 好清楚啦. Two, for research, statistics, or any other legitimate purposes as prescribed by law. Okay, 佢有個兜底嘅，有個萬眾嘅就係其他法例有規定咧，我都可以用。所以呢個咧講清楚俾你聽咧，即係咧你嗰個 record 啦，除咗要嚟打針用之外咧，仲可以做好多研究啊，同埋咧如果係法律上面有規定嘅話咧，佢都可以用嘅。咁即係唔夠個萬可以用，佢點用？佢不過你知啊嘛，你唔佢講咗你開頭已經講咗出嚟，你唔寫咧冇得打喎。OK， 咁但有啲就唔講俾你聽㗎啦。This is good, transparent. Classes of transferee， 因為我頭先講咗啦 ，if they are going to transfer their personal data, they will have to tell, according to DPP, the Data Protection Principle, the classes of transferee. The personal data you provided will be transferred to the government and may also be disclosed by the government to its agents, other organizations and third parties for the purposes stated in paragraph 1 if required. Okay, 又係啦，咩人都可以 transfer if required. Access to personal data, right? DPP 6, section 18(1)(b). Okay, you can access your own data kept by the government and ask for a copy of the data. You have the right to request access to and correction of your personal data under section 18 and principle 6, schedule 1. Okay, the Department of Health may impose a fee. Okay, inquiries. Okay, now this is the statement. All right, they give you a rough idea of what they're going to do with the personal data. They don't tell you the details because, as I said, even if they didn't tell you the purposes and so on, they could rely on the exemptions of public health, right, and research and statistics. But it's good for them to tell you, transparency. And then we have this next page, these considerations to bear in mind. First, we must always find a legal basis before any privacy intrusive steps are taken. In fact, across the board, whenever you have a violation of fundamental human rights, including freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, and so on, fundamental human rights. Whenever the government is trying to restrict the enjoyment of these fundamental human rights, they must satisfy that there is, amongst others, a legitimate purpose, a legal basis that is justifiable. This is number one criteria. Okay? So the court will decide whether the purpose, the basis is a legitimate one. as in the case of judicial review. You must identify a legal basis. And then you must also identify there is a need for it. 無端端你走去改個 law, if there is no need, okay, and then if it concerns fundamental human rights protection, the court won't allow you. Because fundamentals mean fundamental. Fundamental human rights means now we must continue to enjoy this right unless and until it is absolutely not my choice. There is a public interest, okay, overarching public interest that prevails over my personal fundamental right protection. The need must be pressing. There is a need in 20 years' time. No, the need must be pressing. In other words, without this restriction or amendments to the law, the community doesn't work. My life would not continue. This is a pressing need. Accuracy. You must ensure that the personal data used, collected, and transferred is accurate. And transparency, explainability. Retention of the data, how will you keep the data, whether you will be in a position to explain clearly the restriction and the impact on the personal data protection to a man in the street of Causeway Bay, a woman in the street of Mong Kok, so that they will understand what it means, what the impact will be on the persons affected. This is something that I've been advocating not only to the government of Hong Kong, but also the government of mainland authorities, that we need to be explaining. We need to be able to explain to the people affected that their rights will be curtailed, their rights will be affected, especially adversely affected. 我哋要講嘢，中文叫做入屋 ，alright？ 入屋嘅意思就係、你個 message 唔係淨係要企喺香港大學同啲有識之士講咧，佢先明。我講嘅 legal point 啫，唔係一定淨係啲 lawyer 先明。你個個哋都諗住做 lawyer 㗎啦，我諗。lawyer 係最唔識寫人哋睇得明嘅文章嘅人。Right? lawyer 只係識寫 lawyer 又話啊呢個好 legalistic 喎，嗰啲客一聽完之後我都唔明佢做咩，都唔知講咩。但係個好處咧，我嗰個年代咧，啲人連英文都唔識嘅。OK， 我嗰個年代喺呢度讀書，我個班就咁多人㗎啦，30個。OK。成間大學得800個人咋，新生。OK， 而家你哋法學院我都差唔多啊。OK， 收生連埋 JD 啊、part time 啊嗰啲啊。嗰個年代，我個年代係得醫學院、工程學院、理學院、文學院，冇商學院嗰陣時，社會科學院，因為 law 都係社會科學院嘅。OK， 咁全港全一年收生得800個咋，醫學院佔到150人啊。OK， 所以咧每一班得幾廿人嘅啫，right？ 咁所以咧寫到啲嘢人哋唔明咧，咁先顯到你矜貴，咁你收得貴啊嘛。所以你見到我啲同學個個都唔使做㗎啦，唔使好似而家咁做講學咁樣，個個係揸住個遊艇啊喺山頂度住噴緊香檳嘅。但係而家唔同，而家你哋出去咧，你試下講啲嘢寫啲嘢，你而家行唔明咧，人哋會揾第二個，因為大把。所以咧，你哋要學咧就係、你點樣寫到一篇 legal opinion， 唔係個律師對方律師明，係個客都明，呢個就好難。尤其是而家我最近我重新執業啦嚇，我第一次去 court 咧做 trial 咧用中文我都覺得幾吃力真係，用中文審案講嘢。證據都用中文喎 ，summary of facts 乜嘢 facts 咩證據都係中英文喎。我哋中國 council 咧有個唔好處咧就係咧要做2種語文， 因為你唔知道佢 code 嘅時候用邊種文嘅，你做定先嘅。OK， 咁你去到之後一路要講咧，又要即場翻譯喎。OK， 如果係要呈堂嗰啲即寫喎。OK， 所以你係啲中文唔好啦，你就以後咧你冇考慮過啦，你又唔好出去執業啦。OK， 你考慮去教書算啦，因為教書可以講英文。我頭先問咗你可唔可以計，咁你可以啊嘛。仲難嘅就係你要寫到人哋都明。我哋香港政府或者內地政府有一個最大嘅問題就係講 law 啦，係好難入到屋。即係我講好難得，普通牛頭角順水利就係屋村石硤尾嗰啲咧，喺街度行嗰啲聽都明嘅。大部分聽完之後咧，水過鴨背唔知講咩嘅咧，所以你 promote 唔到一啲好重大嘅法律改革。我哋係需要呢一點，咁希望你哋喺法律學院去訓一啲嘅人咧，係可以咧好深嘅法律都好啦，都用好淺嘅中文、廣東話可以講出嚟。呢個好難嘅。尤其是而家呢幾年嗰啲 law 改嗰啲咁深嘅 law， 冇人明佢講咩㗎，我都唔明。OK， 我曾經舉咗一個例子咧，大家頭先睇到嗰張紙仔打針嗰張紙仔，大家有冇銀行戶口啊？我銀行戶口咧，第一個戶口咧就喺呢度開㗎。因為嗰陣時大學生咧入嚟一鬆，得大學生係唔使問問題啦，喺呢度有間匯豐銀行入去用到而家㗎啦，用我。佢寫張紙俾我 personal information collection statement， 每年都俾張我嘅，3頁係英文嘅，另外嗰3頁咧係中文嘅。英文同中文個 font 咧都唔知係8定6嘅，所以我戴埋老花鏡我睇唔到嘅。長到咧 ，OK， 嗰張嘢講明係私隱攞你嘅個人資料喎，我打電話俾佢，私隱專員都睇唔明，你諗住邊個睇得明啊 ？OK。佢真係改咗，佢好開心話俾你聽，佢而家嗰個係人都明啦。咁話我好了解，你嗰張 statement 一定唔係你 draft， 你個 lawyer draft 嘅，你一定唔敢改 lawyer 嘅嘢嘅。但係你話俾佢聽，如果私隱專員都睇唔明嘅話，邊個會明啊？所以個目的達唔到。而我哋希望要呢個 culture 就係你俾任何嘅 statement 政策都人哋睇得明先得㗎，唔係喺嗰本書裏邊。cut and paste，lawyer 最難做嘅地方就係唔做 cut and paste， 就係消化咗之後，好似 algorithm 經過個 machine learning 出翻嚟嗰啲咧，嗰啲先係喎。呢個好難㗎。不過 there is a need for it， 而家開始已經需要係咁做啦。OK， 好啦，你睇下歐洲開始啦。就對於我哋呢啲嘅 COVID-19 嘅 devices 咧，就有啲嘅 guideline 出嚟。咁我哋咧都係睇咗呢啲歐洲啦、UN 啦、OK、WHO 啦，佢哋見到係第2章啊 ，UN 啦、UNHCR 啦、Human Rights、High Commissioner of Refugees 啊 HCR、WHO 啦，佢都有啲 guidelines 啊。係講明咧，譬如呢個 human rights put people center stage， 人以人為本 ，OK， 唔係就係你啲 device， 你要睇下嗰個人有冇受你影響。Balancing relevant rights and COVID-19 呢個 UN 嘅 guidelines 去page 31 slide， be lawful, appropriate confidentiality, security。Time-bound retention, be transparent to build trust, right? UN 嘅，好啦，你見佢講嚟講去都話要 proportionate 啊，要 realism 啊，咁樣我哋去講翻俾你聽，呢個係 human rights， 所以我哋有好多 lawyer 都唔會知道咧，我哋嘅 legal basis 係一個 human rights 咧。That's why next slide please.I try to take you back to an old human rights principle. Okay? It's okay. 因為咧 I was involved in this case back in 1991. 啱 human rights ordinance bill of rights ordinance 出台之後咧，咁我哋嘗試咧去解釋下 presumptions。presumption 係咪會 違反人權啦 ，presumption of guilt 喎。即係我講啦 ，human rights 咧就話你同係告人又好 ，accusation 好，個責任咧係你提供要 produce evidence 去證明佢有罪，因為佢 presume innocent 嘅。咁你而家見到好多嗰啲 criminal legislation 啊嗰啲 law 咧，佢嗰個 presumptions 咧係要嗰個被告人咧係提出合理嘅 justification 嘅理由咧，係證明到佢點解係會咁做。咁將嗰個 onus of proof 咧就 reverse 啦。舉個例就係貪污咁，其實好少人貪污有3個人喺度啊嘛。咁通常咧，佢有啲嘅，譬如你有冇牌照咁，好少人知唔知道你有冇牌咁，所以係你自己攞個牌出嚟嘅。咁呢啲咧嗰陣時咧91年開始都俾人 challenge 㗎啦，就係違反人權法。咁於是咧，我哋有一個 case 咧，就去到 Privy Council。你知道 Privy Council 就係最高級嘅法院啦，嗰陣時，即係等於而家嘅終審庭。嗰陣時喺倫敦嘅。好啦，如果我哋睇 personal data 咧，嗰個 law 裏邊寫個 obligation 啦，係好 realistic 嘅。佢話，譬如 for example for data security。What you need to do is to take all practicable steps. 咩叫 practicable steps 啊 ？Reasonable steps， 係咪？合理啊 ？Exemption， 你見到頭先我讀咗 exemption。If it is likely to prejudice， likely 嘅啫。OK，exemption likely to cause serious harm likely 嘅啫。所以個 threshold 咧，個門檻唔高嘅。Next please， 係咪？仲有啊。All reasonable precautions, all due diligence 啊，嗱呢啲門檻都唔高嘅，啊佢唔係好重嘅門檻，點解咧？因為要 realistic proportion。Next please。OK， 林漢國 Poppy 呢個 case 係 Court of Appeal 嘅，唔係好耐以前嘅2004。The principal proportionality requires that the court must also consider other relevant factors, such as the content of the secret recording, the purpose of privacy infringement. 呢個係講緊 covert surveillance. For example, whether the government is required to conduct investigation and whether other methods of investigation are inappropriate. 要睇下有冇第二啲 less privacy intrusive 嘅 method。咁佢話講，如果係有嘅，嗱，譬如俾個例嘅。以前好多人講咧就咧，你入去一間大廈之前咧，喺個看更度要寫低你嘅號碼嘅名同埋身份證號碼。而家少啦，因為有好多人投訴咧，就係我寫咗之後咧，後面嗰個人抄晒我嘅，又睇到係咪？咁而家通常咧就係點樣咧 ？camera。咁我哋咧就話有 camera 都好啦，你一定要定時要 delete 咗佢啦，係for保安啦，同埋一定要整咗 notice 話俾人聽個 camera 係運作緊嘅。等人哋知道啊咁樣，但係好多都做唔得喎。但係我哋冇咁嘅執法團體去做就好難，即係好等於限聚令幾多人有去食飯，好難 enforce 嘅。Anyway， 呢個咧就係要 the government is required to conduct investigation whether other methods, other less privacy intrusive methods can be used。OK， 呢個係一個 proportionality。有冇啲叫做冇咁私隱侵犯性嘅設備或者係舉措咧可以採用嘅咧咁樣？咁大部分而家都覺得咧喺門口整個鏡頭影出嚟都已經可以接受㗎啦，即係個 culture 唔同咗。And whether the method of investigation is done in accordance with the law， 即係唔該講咧，用法例咧係可以依法。OK， 咁所以點解而家我哋成日都講呢個字咧就係依法。嗱，依法同法治係唔同嘅。我諗陳宏毅老師咧，就成日都講，我第一堂聽佢講大陸法啦，佢都話法治咧 rule of law 同埋 rule by law 係唔同嘅。我諗佢而家仲講嘅。我可能有時聽咗人講之後，可能佢唔講咁多係啫。但係佢一樣係有呢個分別喺度嘅。好 ，next，High 嗱呢個近啲啦，2015年。呢個又係 Court of Final Appeal 嘅，仲高級啲啦。OK， 呢個講緊 time planning 啦，當然嚇。佢話咧一定要 legitimate 嘅 purpose。 一定有個 rational connection between 嗰個 introduce 個 restrictions 同埋個 legitimate purpose， 一定要係 rational 嘅。第三個 consideration 咧就係 no more than necessary。OK， 你唔好 out of proportion。No more than necessary. Further detrimental impact against societal benefit 係個 balancing 嘅，睇下個 society 嘅 benefit。個 detrimental impact on individuals， 清一清個 society 有啲咩 benefit， 咁呢個先至叫做 proportionality test。我哋大家都好出嘅，呢個當然之後仲有，不過呢個係 landmark case on proportionality test。Next please。呢個就係我當年講嗰個啦 ，1993。OK， 呢個 case 係我有份 prepare 去 Privy Council。你出世未啊？OK， Lord Wolf 最近好出名啦。Lord Wolf 呢框 cut 就係講緊 reverse onus of proof 喺 criminal offence。佢證明咗佢有合理嘅原因去做呢樣嘢。一般嚟講咧，都係控方證明嘅啫，佢係犯咗罪。但係有啲 case 咧係會調轉嘅。咁呢個 case 咧就話 ，the issues involving Hong Kong Bill of Rights ordinance should be approached with realism and good sense and kept in proportion。嗰陣時講咧，個個都唔知佢講乜嘅。因為點解咧？因為嗰陣時 Bill of Rights ordinance 啱啱實施咗1年。呢個 case 去到 Privy Council 先係93年，即係我係啱啱開始嘅啫。At that time 我嘅工作咧就係救火隊，就係咧邊個 court 得有 human rights issues 咧，佢就會叫我就係拗呢個 point 嘅啫，拗 human rights 嘅啫。OK， 所以我一日咧去幾個唔同嘅 court 嘅，淨係按一個，因為個個都唔識㗎嘛嗰陣時話，嗰陣時佢哋咁話啦嚇。所以嗰陣時律政司就有一個救火隊嘅隊，就要去做呢啲嘢。The issue involving, if it is not done, the Bill of Rights ordinance will become a source of injustice rather than justice, and will be debased in the eyes of the public. 所以你要 realistic 一啲咁多。如果有啲案件得佢一個人先知道個底細，你都要個警察或者控方去證明到佢有罪啦，就唔 unrealistic 啦。Next。Q&A。係啦。OK，仲有啲時間係嘛
？OK， 我哋先由我哋
5點半完喎係嘛
？OK， 我哋可以做多一陣嘅 Q&A 嘅。如果在座有冇啲乜嘢在座觀眾會有冇啲咩疑問想問嘅話，就可以而家舉手。會唔會有啲咩問題咧
？Sorry, I didn't realize 我已經講咗多過2鐘頭。
唔緊要嘅。
我想問中文英文方面嘅。
你講
中文上冇所謂好，即係大家容易溝通。好。即係頭先啱啱睇新聞咧，咁就話即係蔡玉玲同埋即係港台話就721事件，即係話佢有喺上網話查佢揾翻一啲即係查冊揾翻一啲即係有關話當時一啲相信即係喺事發現場嘅嘅車輛嘅資料，咁就真係之後就話即係一嚟佢就政府都話佢係違個原因就話佢違法。即係話佢違反，都話佢嗰陣時候即係話上去揾呢個方法，但係即係頭先查翻，即係話7486嗰度有啲 exemption， 即係話講翻話係，即係如果相信係一啲 criminal 嘅 activity 之後，可能係有啲 exemption。咁之後咧睇翻，即係會唔會 7486同埋起底，即係所謂即係更加廣泛，除咗呢單 case 之外，可能係一啲關於起底嘅一啲行為式嘅關係，可能會唔會即係可能有啲。明白。
頭先我講嗰啲嘅 legal principles、data protection principles 咧，都係以 data 486為主嘅啫 ，personal data privacy 嘅 protection。頭先你講嗰件 case 咧，雖然我詳細嘅我都唔係好把握，但係我知佢唔係告嗰樣嘢，唔係告 under 486。 佢係告佢第二樣嘢嘛，係嘛？所以咧個 exemption 唔 apply 嘅，因為佢唔係告佢 under 呢樣嗰條 law 啊嘛，係。所以咧你講得啱㗎，佢可以用呢個原因，不過佢告佢嗰條嘅 offence 咧唔係 under 四法律咧，所以 under 四法律嘅 exemption doesn't apply。明唔明啊？
即係頭先可能由司法律嗰個角度。
啱啊！
司法律嗰個角度去分析呢個問題。
啱，其實咧都 public interest 咧都可以嘅，不過咧就要睇 as 頭先啊，再遲一頁啦，同我去翻第一頁。唔係 J 嗰個，張官嗰個，再去到前一頁。Yeah. In accordance with the law， 個 law 唔係啊嘛，所以我哋呢個咧有啲問題嘅。嗰個 offence 咧就唔係 under privacy law， 所以個 exemption 頭先我講嗰啲就唔拉。咁於是咧，嗰條 law 有冇 exemption 啫，就應該就唔係啦。OK， 就所以 public interest 咧你要即係等於咧你係而家好多 offence 咧係同 public order 同埋公民抗命有關嘅，咁你係咪話 public interest 就可以咧？佢而家好明顯就唔係啦，因為個 law 冇寫。OK， 明唔明啊？明白。OK， 係我俾個 observation 啦。我20年前咧就第一次咧嚟我記得嗰陣時係邊個請我嚟咧？係陳文毅做院長嘅時候，佢請我嚟 high table。你要做乜 high table？ 有。OK， 咁邊個同我一齊嚟咧？咁就阿梁家傑，就我哋兩個都做 high table， 所以食飯啦咁。咁我都唔為意嘅。作下隔離有梁家傑同我講，佢話思榮有冇睇到 ？OK， 而家啲學生同我哋以前讀書嗰陣時嘅學生唔一樣喎。我話我哋嗰陣時梗係醒啲啦，你嘅意思就係咁樣。佢唔係，佢聽唔聽到 ？OK， 大部分都係女仔嚟嘅。20年前嗰個比例係2對8，2個男仔8個女仔。而家咧6個女仔4個。而家係6-4啊！但呢度就冇喎，呢度仲係2-8喎，係嘛？喂，你知唔知曾經試過係2對8啊？我哋讀書嗰陣時係7對3男仔，即係完全到過晒啦而家。所以第日咧，我哋會有女法官、女律政司司長，而家都有啦。其實大部分嘅法官都係女仔嚟嘅，因為你畢業嘅全大部分都係女仔，好明顯嘅。所以第日我哋嗰個婦女咩歧視條例咧，第日咧去聯合國交報告咧，一定嘩啦啦，我哋就盡好盡，因為我哋你知唔知道點解會係咁咧？唔係因為啲女仔忽然叻咗，而係你知唔知道有一件案咧，亦都係人命案嚟嘅，就係女仔咧以前咧考試嘅時候係降級嘅，考會考啊。OK， 佢啲分數係拉低翻嚟嘅，因為男仔係遲發育嘅，但係嗰件案輸咗政府，所以咧女仔嘅考試分數係一定高過男仔嘅，喺中學同埋喺 A level 嘅時候，所以着數咗。咁我哋港大咧就係以分數嚟到睇嘅，就唔睇性別嘅，所以你哋入得嚟嗰啲好叻㗎，如果男仔嗰啲，不過好正喎，好有咩啊？嚇？
想問條問題。我本來有2條問題，但係你答咗，因為第一條問題我本來想問，即係你同佢 Each Week 嘅 PCTD 去 limit 咗話要 collection 要 identify
要 compile
要 seek to compile 或者 seek to identify 先至 apply 咁。你頭先都講咗話你想即係你一路都 push 緊話想推去 identifiable 就 OK， 但係所以我第二條問題本來就係想問 practically is it possible？ 因為 let's say 你頭先所講你收集嘅所有 data 都好，你 invariably 都係會 directly 或者 indirectly 都會 refer 到好多其他你附近嘅人，尤其是咁樣。咁如果真係 expand 到所有 identifiable 嘅 use 或者 processing，
都要跟到，
係啦，都要跟啲 PP5俾個 policy 你，或者跟啲 PP3俾個 PRCS 呢個啊。咁 practically 係
啱啦，
唔係 possible？
你真係啱啊！嗱兩個 point 啊，第一個 point 你覺得好啱嘅 ，OK 係咪 practically possible 咧？其實咧而家啦，如果你純粹係從呢個歐洲嘅角度，歐洲好嚴㗎，因為咧佢真係當呢個 human rights 嘅呢個 fundamental 嘅 human rights 咧，佢唔當係 consumers right。譬如喺美國啊，喺內地都係當 consumer rights 多過係一個人權，佢一個利多過係一個權。OK， 唔講啦，你係 consumer 咧，佢消費者嘅權益就多過係一個權利。OK， 咁所以咧就喺歐洲咧，因為歷史原因啦，佢對於人權嘅保障係特別嚴謹嘅。咁大家都知道以前佢哋幾個大戰咧，裏邊咧就好多啲人權嘅受到嘅侵蝕咧，就係佢哋永遠都忘記唔到㗎啦，所以佢哋就特別企得硬嘅。尤其是係德國嘅呢啲國家啦，咁咧而家佢哋將 personal data 呢個字咧，差唔多都同 data 咧係一樣用㗎啦，即係唔使一定要 personal， 因為 data 咧你要離開個 personal 呢個字唔難嘅而家，所以佢用你知唔知道攞到 data 咧，佢都照做㗎啦。主要原因咧就好似頭先講啦 ，OK， 因為好難嘅 ，OK， 咁啊。如果你話係咪一定要全部嘅人咧喺 e-speak 咁樣啦，即係你一定要 intention 去 collect 佢嘅 data， 而佢嗰個 identity 咧係對於嗰個 collector 咧係重要嘅。咁所以點解而家你見到電視上面成日影到你啲行喺大學站度行來回啊，喺街度過馬路啊，喺搭車都冇侵犯你嘅私隱權咧，就一個 case 啊。個 case 話你係乜水？對於無線電視嗰個攝影師嚟講係唔重要，咁就可以過啦。但係當然啦，內地有肖像權啊，嗰啲係另外一回事。OK， 咁所以咧呢個 case 咧如果你係喺現代嘅嘅環境經濟狀況，周圍都係相機 ，OK， 尤其是係我哋經過社會事件又好，經過呢個保安治安嘅環境咧。係令到好多人都接受到咧，相機係一個唔係一定有壞嘢嚟嘅。不過 smart lamp post 嗰個當然係一個例外啦。但係你知唔知喺內地咧，啲人覺得咧，如果佢出街咧係冇相機嘅街咧，佢哋唔入去嘅。你聽過啦，因為佢覺得唔安全。所以咧，你頭先個 point 啦，你係咪要係咁啊？係好難嘅，都會好多人都會涉及到嘅。係啊，真係啱嘅。所以你一定要透明嘅，同埋呢個政府或者公營機構，尤其是警方啦 ，OK， 佢用呢啲嘅時候咧，一定要好清晰。所以我成日都話，最重要嘅原則咧就係 explainability、transparency。OK， 你可以唔入去嘅，你可以要求嘅，你可以要求 delete 咗佢嘅，你可以要求 copy 嘅，佢肯做就得㗎啦。同埋一定話俾你聽，你入去之前嗱一陣間後邊咧有3個鏡頭望住你嘅，請你小心。咁你可以唔入去㗎嘛，你唔想俾人。但係而家我哋好多時咧係唔知道俾人 collect 咗個 data 啊嘛，係咪？你見到而家舉個例啊，喺中環啦，你行過好多地方都好多鏡頭，但係有幾多個話俾你聽佢有鏡頭喐緊㗎？好少㗎嘛。但係呢個好難執法㗎啦，呢個 OK。好啊。
OK 係因為都要 wrap up。咁而家時間差唔多啦，咁我哋嘅問答環節就喺呢度完結啦。我哋而家就進入頒發紀念品嘅環節，就有請香港大學學生會法律學會嘅主席黃韻玲小姐為黃大狀致送紀念品。咁就有請黃大狀就請移玉過去到呢個位，呢度去接受紀念品。
哦，係啦，呢個章會。
咁最後就好多謝黃大狀出席我哋今日嘅公民講堂。我哋今日嘅公民講堂亦都就此圓滿結束。我哋6月咧會喺香港大學學生會法律學會營運嘅社交媒體專頁 Legal Column 法律專欄上傳翻講堂嘅摘要文章嘅。如果有興趣嘅話，就記得留意我哋嘅社交媒體啦。多謝各位。